One of the greatest opportunities this podcast gives me is the chance to sit down with other designers and learn about the paths that have shaped their career and also learn about how they're currently navigating the ever-evolving world of user experience design, product design, and technology. For me, it's inspiring to hear about the different paths that lead people to what I believe is an amazing field, and also learn about how they're navigating the challenges that come with an ever-evolving landscape. In today's conversation, I had the chance to speak with Jelena Colak. She's now the Associate Director of User Experience and Information Architecture at Fusion 92, as well as the voice behind her podcast, Na Kavi, and the writer behind Tech Brat, her recently released newsletter. Throughout our conversation, we dive into emerging technologies, how AI is transforming the role of a designer, and how key traits like being curious, learning to storytell, and being adaptable can be leveraged not just to advance your career, but also to create exceptional experiences. So much more to come. But with that, I want to welcome you to Christian Talks Product Design. I'm your host, Christian Pineda, and a big welcome to our guest, Jelena Colak. Jelena, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. You seemed very passionate about not just the world of user experience and product design, but also emerging technologies. And so I'm really happy to have you on the call. Right now, you're actually working at Fusion 92, but that's not really where you started your career, right? It's been about 7 years. I'd love to hear about your journey to how you got to where you are now.
First of all, thanks for having me, Christian. It's great to be here. Excited to talk about the topics that we're both passionate about. I can go on and on about product design, UX design, and just emerging technologies. So thank you for having me. How I started. So really, I like to say I kind of fell into it. Not really, but I did. I accidentally discovered the world of UX when I was just a sophomore in college. I transferred into university thinking that, majoring in journalism, thinking that, I love researching, I love learning about people, I like writing about it. And then being good at technology, my Croatian parents were like, you should do something with computers. So I took this minor that at the time was called Interactive and Social Media at DePaul, because I saw there was like some web development happening there, HTML, CSS, front end design. I was like, if I'm going to be a journalist or work in media, it's good if I have some tech background because maybe it will give me a leg up, right, in the emerging world.
Right.
This is now 10 years ago where I was like, everything is going online. It was still like, it was just the beginning of everything. Turns out I hated my journalism major and I loved my minor.
Really?
And the minor turned out to be, and eventually was renamed into user experience design, but everything we were learning was around user experience design. And I just love, it had all those components of what actually initially attracted me to journalism, which, when you're younger, when you're just starting in college and when you're just trying to figure out your way in the world, your knowledge of what's out there is limited. You just know like, oh, I want to write or I want to learn more about people. So I guess I want to go into journalism. But then I just absolutely did not like that. That wasn't the path for me. But UX had that research component of it, learning new things all the time, touching different aspects of people's lives through whatever you're designing. And then, of course, the creative aspect of it, of actually designing and finding creative problem solving. And then, eventually through internships, I started more on, because at the time, most UX designers were in tech and corporations, and just like marketing was more either graphic design, and everything was just new in that world. I started as, a digital designer on a team where I helped from managing their e-commerce site, creating graphics for the site, uh, developing emails. So I don't about coding
Wow.
emails. So that was
That's the
my
first
start.
time that I hear someone call out developing emails. That must be a huge endeavor. I mean, you have to think about every single browser, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's it's we talk about it. I talk about it a lot with developers because now what's so interesting, it's come for full circle. While I do, work on websites for clients and products, there's always a e-commerce or a email marketing lead gen component to it. And I touch some emails, so now it's just interesting that I've gone full circle and that I talk to developers. Like emails stuck in 1995 still, and you code it like you did websites in 1995. It hasn't really changed. So yeah, you have to think about a lot of the browsers and the email clients and different, requirements for it. But it's interesting. That's what I like about UX and product. The more constraints and requirements you have, the more you have to think about creative problem solving. It's not, for me personally, like I love putting the puzzle pieces together. If it's too easy, it's not interesting.
Oh,
It's like,
100%. And it's weird because and I know you're going through like your career journey. That just stood out to me because one, I've never actually heard of a designer, working on like the engineering aspect of creating an email. But something else that stood out to me was your journalism background.
Mhm.
And I know you said it just wasn't your cup of tea, but is it fair to say that there's actually quite a lot of overlap in the world of journalism and the world of user experience? I mean, there's methods like I think it's the 5W1H approach to
Mhm.
understanding, the problem space. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that as like something that designers should kind of look into? Do you think that helped you in making that transition into that minor?
I think it did. Like you said, the basics of journalism. It helps you put you in the mindset of research and putting yourself out there. I think sometimes creative careers like this one, or even like a technical, like a developer, sometimes a lot of introverts are um, kind of attracted to it because a lot of it is done on your own time. And then you gotta have to come out of your shell when you have to present something, but not necessarily. Sometimes you're just the busy bee that's doing the work. And then it depends on where you put yourself in. But I think with the journalism part of it, I'm personally more extrovert. I think that's very noticeable when you speak to me. But there's still, in journalism, you're forced to kind of go out there and not take no for an answer. And while I didn't want to be really ruthless with people and try to get information, that's not my cup of tea. Like I just can't, I can't put myself that much out there. Doing research, doing user interviews, looking for people to interview and trying to present your work. I think that's something that that's where you get out of your comfort zone, and you have to be ready to do that. And I think having that experience with journalism has helped me. And also, it taught me to write a lot and have structured writing, which is very valuable, a very valuable soft skill just in general in life, but especially in this business when you're writing requirements and trying to explain the decisions you made when designing something. That's all that kind of all intertwines. So there's definitely some benefits from my, background there that I found.
There's a post that I saw recently that really resonated with me, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it had to do with, if your thoughts are all over the place, right?
Hmm.
And, kind of tying back to that structured writing, it does help in a creative field where you're kind of ideating a lot of the times and also kind of figuring out how everything fits into this like grand puzzle to take a step back and actually, put things on paper or, type
Hmm.
them out. So I could really see how that really, benefited your career. Now, I know you were going through working on emails. What company was that again?
That was a Bosch.
That was
Bosch
at
Power Tools.
Bosch.
Yes. So I started at Bosch Power Tools, and then eventually went into their IoT department and was then officially a UX designer there. But yeah, I started at Bosch Power Tools on their on their global marketing team. And the team knew that I had this UX background. That's why they kind of pulled me in also, because they wanted to, be aligned with the times and have that leg up, even though the team was more maybe marketing oriented. But I had the freedom to apply all of the knowledge that I had at the time and then grow further. So we, sometimes it's not as black and white as, oh, you're doing your traditional UX role in developing a website or e-commerce site or a product. Sometimes it's, for example, at the beginning at Bosch, their sub-brand Dremel was launching a laser cutter, and I helped with the complete launch, from what's going and what the page and the experience of buying and or signing up for or like pre-launch sign up experience is going to be like, to the customer experience in the background is, when are certain emails going out? How do people update their payment before it's, charged officially? Because this was like a $3,000 laser cutter. So it was important to have a really good experience. So sometimes I feel like that's not talked about enough, where experience isn't just what you see on the page. It's also what's happening in the background and what's leading to the experience on the page. Experience starts when the user decides they need something, and maybe they're looking for it. They don't know what they're looking for yet.
I really love that. I think, and it's funny because you were fortunate enough to find yourself in a position where you're still kind of early on in your career, and you were kind of put in a situation where you needed to look at the entire landscape. A lot of designers, especially when they're starting off on an enterprise level organization, might only be looking at a very specific, narrow section of the SaaS application. But there's something that comes with a level of maturity of design where you do have to look at the end-to-end experience. It really does start before the customer even touches or starts using the application or decides to become a customer. And then you have to figure out how to translate that throughout the user journey. Do you have any tips for younger designers that are still in the situation where they haven't fully started to think about the entire user journey and how they can start proactively looking at that larger landscape?
Yeah. I mean, my approach has always been, it's a detail-oriented job. You have to think about the details, right? But I like to think about, how does this one detail, like, what's the bigger picture? Thinking about, okay, I'm designing this one feature. How is it affecting not just this particular page or this particular journey? What else is being triggered here? And then I start looking wider and wider. So I encourage people to think about, kind of dream a little bit, because when I'm designing something, I'm kind of dreaming about what it is really, because sure, your requirements, but I think that's also how you kind of foster thought leadership in your career growth, where you're dreaming up things and you're thinking of, oh, I'm, let's say, solving a sign-up journey. There's an issue, people aren't converting, and we're trying to sign more people up. So you're designing a new user journey. Think about how this sign-up can now be applied to maybe some other similar journeys on that page or product, and then what this particular journey can be applied to in the grand scheme of things. Like, how can you see this sign-up journey maybe turn into a buy now if it's like a product, or if they're signing up for a app or something? How can maybe that journey disappear in the future? So dreaming up new scenarios kind of gives me personally room to think about strategically how it affects other parts of the whole ecosystem of whatever it is that you're designing. I think a lot of times at least when I was younger, my experience has been like you're waiting to be given a problem and then solving it. Why not look for the problems and come to your manager or whoever and be like, hey, like while I was designing this, I also noticed, there's an issue, potential thing that we can maybe fix an X, Y, and Z that I could see being a issue. Like trust your gut. With experience, you start noticing things. And I think it's just empowering yourself to trust your gut. And there's no right or wrong at the end of the day. There is, but a lot of it is testing. And, one type of rule might not be applicable in another type of experience just because, the users are different. The industry is different. A user that's a little less tech savvy might need more hand holding in a journey versus like a Gen Z that's super tech savvy. So, sometimes it's just about trusting yourself and empower yourself to find those problems and suggest issues. That's how, I don't know if I like off it.
No, you did answer it, and I completely agree. I mean, I think, as you're going through your career, you start to see patterns and you start identifying, hey, this works, this doesn't. And, while people are going through whatever design process, whatever problem they're trying to solve, it's important to start, kind of dreaming, as you were mentioning about, like, how is this impacting everything else? Something that I always get stuck on is like messaging, keeping messaging consistent throughout the process. I think that's something that a lot of apps or even websites fail on. But I guess it's kind of like a double-edged sword, and I don't know if you've seen this in your own career, where there is an instance where you should kind of bring it back.
Yes, I think definitely as designers. So I guess you're right on that. You don't want to dream too much. So you have to be aware of the technical constraints or just or just regular requirements. You can dream up as much as you want, but also there's like time limits and there's technical constraints. Like I said, you don't want to go too far out. I think in that regard, what's helped me is trying to understand how things are built and knowing the limits and opportunities there. So knowing the limits or opportunities as well, sometimes it's a good thing in your toolbox, because then, if a developer is like, well, we can't do that, you can say, actually, isn't that just changing a CSS code, which is very easy to do? And then you're kind of like, knowing the background can also be a very valuable thing for you to stand up for what you designed, but also helps you know the constraints and not go too far. So I think it's important. We're always, as designers, usually it's always just design, and experience. And then like, the developers will figure out how to develop it, or, the product owner will keep a track of the requirements. I think being willing to and understanding that you are an important player in all of these steps and not just in design helps you with designing good things. There's nothing more that I hate than when there's conversations being discussed about a certain experience or a problem that's being solved, and a UX person or product design person is not involved in it. It's just not. You can't solve problems that are tech problems without also having, I think, an experienced person, user experience product person in there. It's just so not, we want the whole team there. And then knowing that you are a valuable part of all these decisions helps you, I think, then steers you in exploration and learning some of the skills you feel like you might be lacking, or asking the right questions. You don't have to know everything, but you're there to be the person that asks the most questions. Be annoying.
There's something to be said for, being transparent about your experience and what you don't know. And I think that's also one of the really important reasons why product designers, UX, should be in those types of meetings and advocate to join those calls because, an engineer or even a product manager might not even think about the questions
Yeah,
that you're going to ask.
absolutely.
I'm curious, did you ever fully learn to code? Is that kind of where that comes from? Or did you just
I
dabble?
So I did front end development in school and then at Bosch a little bit. I had some Python classes, but I do not remember anything. But what has stayed in my mind, I actually did some SQL as well, some SQL classes in college. What has stayed was just the logic behind it, understanding that things are labeled in a certain way, like data needs to be labeled, what a CSS style sheet is, what HTML does, what all these languages might do has helped me visualize in my head how things are built. And I think that's where my information architecture experience comes in, where sure, we think about making good experiences, but I also have to think about the back end and how it's like what's the conversation between the front end and the back end. I think that makes
Yeah.
for effective UX because like UX, like I said, is not just putting the correct puzzle pieces on what the user sees. It's also about, the back end supporting it. Like if you can't support a short sign up process, when you click sign up, there's also an experience happening in the background that you want to optimize. Is there an email coming to you, a confirmation email that you signed up for this? Is there, what's the email going to say? Is there like actions that you have to do after that email has come, or is that fine? And then who's managing that process to ensure that the process that you as a user is getting is seamless or experience? Sorry.
100%. I mean, it's really thinking about not just that sign up process that you mentioned, but also like what fields are relevant, right? Do we need to know the person's department, what they do, specific credentials, payment, things like that?
Yeah.
And also, how does it impact other areas of the application?
Yeah.
So was it at Bosch when you started to really get into information architecture, or did that happen at a different point in your career?
That's such an interesting question because I tried to remember that myself, but I can't really. I think it is because like I mentioned at Bosch, it was, you already have this legacy website and these legacy processes or even like brand guidelines. Like I didn't have a lot of, in those first few years, I actually didn't work a lot on any brand or like UI changes. Like there was a brand kit that you have to follow. And then it's really just creating wireframes that then you end up transferring into the brand standards that have been around for a while that I, as a junior at the time, have no say in. So it really was, I think at that time, whether it was redesigning the page or thinking about messaging and like a launch, what the email is going to say and when these people are supposed to get certain communication about certain payment requirements or whenever the launch for that laser cutter I mentioned was, I think that's probably when I started thinking about information architecture. And it started very abstract. Also, information architecture, like a lot of people define it differently. So I think from company to company, it has changed. But yeah, that was probably my start.
What would you, like, how would you, because now I'm curious, how would you define information architecture?
For me, it's not just, traditionally people think it's just, when you think about a website, putting together the website sitemap and thinking about the sections on each page. Sure, that's the most like simplest form of it. But my experience has also been, so most recently at Fusion, working on an enterprise product. We were, for example, I had to create a data experience. I can talk a lot. I can't like name the things that I'm doing, but I had to think about the logic of how the data of this experience is going to communicate with each other. So I'm doing like data flow diagrams and things that maybe a systems designer or engineer would traditionally take on. I had a say in that because it was affecting the UX. So maybe a traditional information architect role in some companies doesn't do that and is thought of more as just like touching a website and the information on a website. My experience has been on these web products that I worked on. A lot of it is talking to the engineers and thinking about how to effectively organize data and how data is being talked to. So data labeling, taxonomy of, content libraries, whatever it is. I talk about a lot of it now when it comes to AI, is that the future of my role? Let's say, am I going to be working on AI models or like an experience? It's not tangible per se. You don't see it. It's not on a page, but it's happening in the background. So how do you, as an information architect, make sure that that's effective? Organizing information.
And I think that, and actually I'd like to get your thoughts on it, but from my perspective, if you are able to early on effectively clean up the way that data is communicated throughout the platform, you're 10 steps ahead of so many other organizations.
Yes.
The way that you have data being pulled in different directions can be quite messy if it's not being labeled correctly. Do you have any guiding principles that you could share for how people should think about prioritizing information architecture?
Oh, it goes case by case basis, I guess. But when it comes to data, there's a lot of legacy companies, which is my sister's a data analyst, so I hear some things about how these legacy like big enterprises have years and years of data collecting. It's not easy. Even for like a huge e-commerce legacy website, it's not easy to go back and be like, oh, let's start from scratch. But I think it's there's some workshops you can do or processes that are in UX, like affinity diagramming and card sorting of the info that you have in. But for me, it's always looking at what you have right now, laying it all out, and then literally just starting to it's literally like a puzzle, take apart the puzzle and now put a new puzzle together. So often what I see in websites that are just like having information added on, or even in data, things are being added on, is that you forget what the initial strategy for organizing was it, and you just start it starts developing into this new thing that at the end stops making sense, and at some point everything just becomes a mess. So it's, I think, reassessing the strategy and literally just pulling things apart and putting it back together again. Maybe it's, the buckets of information are now named differently just because there's been new offerings or new type of data is being gathered in a database. Maybe initially it was just, you're gathering data about flowers and trees, and now all of a sudden there's cheese and meat. Organize the two the same way. You don't organize cheese and meat as you did with flowers and trees, for example. So now you have to find new ways to organize all of that, right?
It's a pretty big endeavor, right? They need to set aside quite a good amount of time for that. But to backtrack a little bit, you have experience, my understanding is, in the Internet of Things, digital transformation, and e-commerce. And I guess this ties a little bit to what you were just saying. What's been your approach to adapting to all of these different landscapes? Are there any tips that you can share?
Being curious, I think, and always not being afraid. I think we talked about it a little bit, not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to say you don't know things. And I think that's the delight of our job, is that, at least for me, as I get to learn about these things that I never would have ordinarily learned about. Like, I know so much about power tools, because my first job was in the power tools department. About like, why? I would never know that. I'm not a DIY person. Like, I'm not using power tools in everyday life. But now I do know a lot about it. And in the future, maybe someday when I, own a home, I will actually use that information. But even if it's not directly like an interesting personal topic to me, it's still interesting to learn new things. And I think to be successful in this job, you just have to be willing to learn new things and be open-minded. Even if it's like, let's say to you, the most boring topic. To me, it even if it's quote unquote at first the most boring topic, it's not boring because I'm learning something new and uncovering something new there. So I think that's the first thing that leads me into all of these is I'm ready to get my hands dirty and not be afraid to be like, hey, I've never worked in this sector or with this, like, I don't know, like I've never worked in fintech. But if there was like a, product that was like, oh, it's like the financial sector, I'm like, okay, let's start reading about it. Let's start reading about the customers, how all of this is being done. Like, let me call up any friends that work in the financial sector and learn more about it. And then throughout work, you just learn more.
It's one of the really cool things, I think, about product design, user experience design, and tech in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, we're focused on this, I wouldn't call it narrow, but we're focused on this specific area of production. But the job the career enables us to go into different marketplace, different industries, and learn so much about them. Even the ones that seem ordinary have a lot of, interesting facets to them. How are they actually functioning is something that I find is really interesting to dive into when I'm doing user research or competitive analysis. So that actually brings me to one other question that I was thinking about. You're now a associate director, am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How has this role changed your perspective on working on products and collaborating with teams? I assume that, the shift of individual contributor to having people reporting to you must have been significant. How have you handled that?
So I'm still kind of getting into the people reporting to me. I don't have official direct reports yet, but I am empowered to mentor, and I do sort of in project manage work. I'm there more as like an associate, a director of the vision, and then I'm not the IC doing it. Sometimes it's sad in the sense that like, I'm sure you can relate. Like, I do like getting my hands dirty and being in Figma and doing the work. But I do also like being the one in charge of the broader picture and having the space to have a bigger impact, even though I'm not the one executing it at times. I still am, because it's a smaller team, luckily. So it's a nice balance. Sometimes you're just driving the vision, and other times you're driving it and executing it. But I think I've always tried to do that, even when I was a individual contributor, in the sense that I never just, like I said, took the assignment and just did it without asking any questions, without suggesting maybe the solution that was suggested to me to implement. I always suggest something individual, because when you're doing it, you notice gaps.
Exactly.
So now I'm just maybe more, and maybe I'm just like, oh, now you have to do it for sure. Like, we trust that you know how to do it. It's just that level of trust that comes with it. But in terms of working with more team members, I was lucky to have the opportunity to interact with other like cross-functional teams, with developers, even with SEO, content, copywriters, all of that. Now it's more putting our heads together and having a say in the strategy, which I really like, because I really feel like me trusting my gut and then seeing that whatever I suggested eventually has that success. It's really great to see that you've made that impact and that you are also part of that broader team thinking of a strategy. for whatever the solution is.
That really resonates. And I mean, based on your background, I understand that you do have a very entrepreneurial background. I mean, you have the multiple newsletters that you brought to live. You have the podcast, which, by the way, I know it's kind of a side note. How do you pronounce it?
So it's called Na Kavi.
Na Kavi.
Yeah, and it means in Croatian at coffee. So like you're sitting at coffee, and that's like it's just the way people when they gather in Croatia, you know how here in the States, a lot of people go to dinner and for drinks. In Croatia, a lot of it is you go to coffee, and then everything we're gonna go for a coffee, and then the coffee can be at 7 p.m., which could mean beers and a drink or a mocktail or whatever you choose to drink. But you're still gathering at that. There's a big coffee culture, and like you sit at coffee and drink the same coffee for like 3 hours, and
Love
talk.
that.
So that's where it came from. The whole sort of vibe around the podcast was I'm sitting down and we're having coffee and chatting about
that's really
entrepreneurial
cool.
endeavors. Yeah, I like to do a little like creative like metaphors and my brands. I like to kind of like tie it in and build a world around whatever I'm doing personally in my personal endeavors.
That is amazing. And I think it has some. So you actually also recently created a Tech Brat, right?
Yeah, that's my newsletter. Yeah.
What was your driving vision for that?
So, emerging technologies, like we mentioned a little bit, AI, and there was all this talk about AI is going to take over our jobs and AI this, AI that. And I really, sure, as a designer perspective, there will be tools that will help our jobs. I don't think it will take over our jobs ever, because as we've been talking, designers are not just people pushing pixels and, think that's all we do. There's a lot of strategy work, and there's a lot of thinking, and there's a lot of invisible things we touch. So that's where the drive came, where I was like, let me actually start researching about these technologies and how they're built. And then from that, I thought, why not compile all this information I find and document my learning journey? Because I felt like I couldn't find a newsletter that was talking more about like, here are some resources, and talking not just about the tools that I can use as a designer, but how to build those tools, how to contribute to the creation of those tools. So really that's where it came from. And then the name is just me being...
Great name, by the way. I have to say it again.
Tech Brat is, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit about as a woman, just being proud of my opinions and not being afraid to share them. And maybe sometimes, there was a part of me at some point that I was like totally anti ChatGPT. Like I thought it was just no, like it wasn't, I wasn't like, oh, it sucks, whatever. But I thought people were talking about it so much and like putting it on a pedestal. And that was like my bratty opinion, where I was like, no, like ChatGPT, you guys are so obsessed with it for no reason. Obviously, I've learned now throughout my journey that there's a lot of things to appreciate about it. But I was like, I have some bratty stances. So let's just own that with the name, and then give myself space to make the mistakes and share them. And then, maybe like 3 newsletters after, be like, oh, actually, after all this research, I changed my opinion. And that's okay. I think that's the whole premise of it.
I love that. I mean, people are so quick, I included sometimes, to just jump on the bandwagon, right? Like cognitive bias. It sounds like, it's selling you the world. But a lot of people also thought the same thing about, to a degree, VR and crypto.
Yeah.
Right? And we were on back-to-back waves. So, I mean, it's completely understandable. And almost commemorable to, have taken a step back to say, well, let me actually look at the
Yeah.
capabilities and see how well it actually performs. That's really cool. And you're kind of like in this intersect of, you have information architecture, which I would think ties in perfectly with AI model training and even
Mhm.
conversation design, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of that is, how does that data flow? Um, but on a side note again, how have you been using AI for just your personal work? Do you usually just use ChatGPT, or have you explored other platforms?
So I've been using ChatGPT a lot to as like a partner in ideating. I sometimes I use it as a search. So and I think a lot of people have been doing that. You don't use Google as much. If you want like a broader, like you're not really know what you're specifically looking for, you kind of like tell a Chat GPT and then it spits it out for you. So the note taking AI is called Fathom. And it's been joining meetings with me and some other coworkers on Teams. And I'm sure it joins other platforms. That's just the software we use. But it's great because what I found is it's taking all the notes, it kind of compiles it, it puts bullet points. It's like it really understands what's happening in a conversation so much that in one meeting we totally had like a sidetrack fun conversation. And we're sending gifts to each other as like a joke. Sometimes you just need in a work session of it that's an hour or a 2 hour long. Like sometimes you just need a little break. So it didn't take notes of that. Like it just recognized that it wasn't relevant work conversation to the topic.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't include anything. We were joking like, oh, because it was the first time we were using it, we were joking that, oh, now it's going to have this whole conversation that's irrelevant to our work in there. But it didn't. So I've been pretty impressed with that. That's one of the AIs I've been using. And then for IA work, I've been trying out a platform that's I think it's called octopus.do. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't. How does it work?
So it's really cool. What I've been using it for is when we're doing like a website redesign or restructure, especially if it's a big website, you take the link in the XML link of the website, put it in the AI, and it spits out an information architecture visual of the website for you with metadata information, which also then helps like an SEO team or the content team or whoever.
Wow.
And it's been really easy and it's been helping me a lot because usually before I'd had to manually go through the whole website and kind of visualize, at least in FigJam, the whole, sitemap to then work from and assess and kind of like bring in thoughts around how to reorganize it. And I'm sure there's more use cases. I haven't used it for data yet or anything, but I'm sure there might be, if not now in the future, somewhere where it would kind of, if you put in an Excel sheet or any type of data file in there, it would spit out probably a visual around, what the current organization tree of it is. So those are kind of my
That's
three
pretty cool.
current. Yeah. And then I feel Notion AI, I use Notion, but I've been playing around with it a little bit, but not actively. I don't know how it is for you, but AI hasn't become such a regular thing in my life where I'm using it without thinking about it. Like it's not like an extension to my processes currently. I have to go and be like, oh, maybe I'll go use Chat GPT for this. It's not,
Yeah.
it hasn't become like a support, like a mindless thing that where it's automated. I don't think about it right in my processes. It's still this new thing where I like, oh, like there's AI that can help me with this. Maybe I'll go check that out.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, I mean, for me, it's definitely, I think, been the latter, where I
Hmm.
use it for absolutely
Okay.
everything. More so just because it allows me to complete tasks so much
Hmm.
faster. I mean, just yesterday, I really like Excel sheets. As a designer, I know that sounds crazy. It's
What?
Yeah, because it goes back to measuring things. I love measuring things like how well did users, go through this workflow, et cetera, et cetera. And Excel is just an easy way for me to start plugging in values and, create reports from it. And by no means am I good at Excel, but with the power of, GPT, I'm able to just ask it like, hey, can you create a script really quick that, takes all of the data from column X in this page and like reports it as X value. And it just does it for me. And it's amazing.
That's
So for
awesome.
things like that, ChatGPT is absolutely amazing. Phantom, I'm definitely going to check it out, throw in like a mock XML file and see how it works. Is it usually a long process?
You mean for Octopus?
Oh, that's right. Octopus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Phantom's the note-taking one.
Okay.
It's like a couple seconds, if I remember correctly. It's been like a couple weeks now since I used it last time for a project, but you just put it in, it's like loading a little bit, and it just pops it out in like a matter of seconds. So I don't know if I popped in like a really huge website. I guess the one that I did pop in was about like 5,000 pages. So I guess that's not a small website, but it was quick.
Wow.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
5,000 couple of seconds. I'll take that. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Have you used things to generate UI, or have you kind of just kept it on the strategy side?
I've tried Galileo.
Okay.
I think it's called Galileo, right?
Galileo was definitely
Yes.
one of them.
Yeah. So I've tried Galileo. I haven't used anything that I generated there. I think that's sort of my next step where I want to explore it a little more. I think for me, I'm still personally learning to like effective prompt creating. I need
Okay.
like I feel like that's a skill in it itself. Is like you need to know how to write a good prompt. And that's been part of my learning journey, is like learning really to craft the appropriate prompt that you need to get what you want, especially from like a platform like Galileo. If I need something specific, I need to specifically describe it, and to get that. So we'll see. But that's been something that I've used. Other than that, no, I haven't been. I think also it's when it comes to clients, a lot of clients are still not on board with using AI to create work, which is, I think, from what they're paying for. I understand, you want an expert to create a design. I understand their perspective. So I think that's been a very interesting, let's say, constraints when it comes to using AI in my own work. That's not personal work, sure, but like work. Yeah, that's been a constraint. That
I could understand that.
Yeah, I can
One
see
of the
that
big
being an issue.
things, one of the big things that I've heard a lot of people say is just the concerns over data privacy.
Yeah.
Right. So one part is I want an expert to be working directly on my project. The other part is, am I okay with the experts leveraging these tools if it puts my data in jeopardy?
Yeah.
Right. So it's, I guess, for those that are designing AI products, just a plug there is, how do you think about creating that data transparency? And how is that visualized? I think that's going to be really important moving forward. How do you think? And you know what? Before I even move on, I kind of, it resonates with me the way that you use Galileo. I think you mentioned one of the big hesitations that I've had with those types of platforms is that they don't integrate into active design systems or style guides. So you get these designs that may or may not work, and then you have to translate them into your own thing. Now, this past week, I had a really interesting conversation, and my mindset sort of shifted, where I think I was too tied up in the whole idea of, man, I want something that is ready to go and I can hand over to engineers. And it's shifted to, Oh, these platforms are actually pretty cool for just brainstorming, mostly for personal projects. Like,
Okay.
hey, create a sign up flow. These are the things that I need to be in there for it, and do that 4 times. And it's just a quick way
Okay.
for me to visualize, like, hey, this is how everything could possibly work. And then I'll go into Figma or whatever and, jam out. So that's one way you can approach it if you're interested.
Yeah, that is a good idea. It is because sometimes you get so blocked in the beginning, like when you have a blank canvas and like, where do I start now?
Yeah, yeah,
Like the
exactly.
sketching process, even though I love the ideation process, sometimes you just don't have the energy or time to spend a lot of time on the ideation process. And that, yeah, that's a good, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try that. That,
Definitely give it a shot.
yeah, I will. Thanks for the
Do
tip.
you see do you see things changing stylistically uh in the near future? And like what are your like thoughts on what's coming for design in the next like 6 months?
I, I'm very torn in the sense that I see some minimalism emerging, but I also
Okay.
see maximalism emerging. But what I don't like is that everything is looking the same. And
Oh yeah.
it's it's either or, but you can tell, and I think that comes with these platforms and softwares that exist right now that are templated like Squarespace, Webflow, uh, even Canva, Framer. Like they all are great tools, but it's making everything look the same because a lot of people are just going to the template and then maybe tweaking colors but it's because it's fast, great. Like I personally, like for my portfolio website, I'm in the process of redesigning it, but I'm probably going to use a template for my first pass just because it's faster than me doing something from scratch. Even Webflow or building in a Framer Webflow from scratch. Um, but that I don't know if in the next 6 months I'm hoping to see more people get away from that and start doing more unique things. But what's hard about that is I think there are so many design standards that you want to follow to make a website usable.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's impossible to then be creative without sacrificing usability. So I think that might be something that comes up in the next 6 months. It's like, how do you do that? How do you try and differentiate yourself while still making sure your website is usable? Because sometimes I see websites where you can tell it's somebody super creative that did it, but there's so much animation, there's so many things flying around, and it's just not it's a pretty website. It looks so cool, but it's not user friendly. It's not usable.
Yeah, it's the dribble effect, right?
Yeah.
There's still a lot of that. And big shout out to those folks that are able to
Yeah.
put together those like
Yeah.
really cool like landing pages. But you're right, there is this like balance that we'll have to continue to like interact with. Figuring out how do you make things look unique and like
Hmm.
close to the brand, but also meet like accessibility guidelines and just best practices. I'm excited. I'm excited to see like if VR has
Mm,
any like if there's any like bleed into normal interfaces. I know that Meta made a big splash with those
yeah.
Orion glasses. Did you check those out?
I mean I saw what it is. I have not had the opportunity to touch to them at all. And I don't know if those aren't really readily available anywhere. I know they're just like prototypes, right? Or are
Th-
they out?
no, no. I think
Yeah.
I think what they mentioned was it's a very, very early stage
Okay, yeah.
prototype, quote unquote. Zuck is saying that they will never be like in people's hands. I
Okay.
think that that's just something they're saying, right? Eventually, we'll get to a place where like the Ray-Bans will have those capabilities, and I am stoked to see what that looks like.
Gonna be interesting, yeah. If that's
It's,
Yeah, that's, I mean, there's a lot of talk about devices and what's that next stage of devices with AI and the future. So I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, 100%. Which actually reminds me, do you have any big plans? Like, what are your upcoming goals, career-wise, platform-wise? I know you're juggling the newsletter, you're associate director, and I'm sure you have other things going on. Any big highlights?
For future, I think in 2025, definitely grow Tech Brat more and just become more integrated and kind of start sharing my voice more. I think becoming associate director has really given me that confidence to be like, okay, now I feel like I'm a professional and I can share my opinion, even though I'm still learning, and hopefully you're learning for the rest of your career always. You never want to, kind of,
Stagnate.
yeah, exactly. That's the word. So I'm hoping to just continue to grow Tech Brat, maybe director role. Who knows? That'd be awesome in 2025. I'd love to see
Rooting
that.
for you. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, I really hope that personally I start steering more towards AI products, and I would love to work on a full project of designing an AI model. That's kind of now been sort of like a fixation of mine and a dream. It's just this whole new world and a little more complex, and it's just something that I find very exciting. And we'll see. There's a lot of companies wanting to implement AI now, and it's still a lot of it is like, oh, maybe we need a chat or something that's already on the market. But I'm really hoping it starts steering towards, how can we revolutionize existing workflows and use AI to enhance them versus plugging in an AI to an existing old school workflow.
I love that. I think that's where the big opportunity lies with AI integration, not just, thinking about, oh, let's add a chatbot, but how does, how can AI powered processes enhance what's currently there or bring new features to life?
Yeah.
You will get a lot of fruitment from me. I hope you get that project soon. And hey, I will continue to encourage you to play around with ChatGPT and all of these other platforms.
I will.
There's so much different use cases. But Jelena, if you ever want to jump back on the podcast, feel free to reach out. I love talking to you. If you ever have any topics that you want to chat about, ping me, and doors always open.
I will, of course. Can't wait to talk more, read more of your newsletter, and listen to more of your podcasts. I'm just, excited to see where the next year takes us both.